Matt does a great job breaking down game film, making it understandable, digestible, and different things. But I'm really concerned lately because I'm seeing a lot of photos and videos of flowers and bees, and I'm a little concerned right now.
Nothing to be concerned about. I don't guess. I don't think. But I've had, I think it's probably as much as anything else, about a month ago or a couple months ago, a friend of mine who has been going to the Masters year after year for many, many years, said he was giving us 2 passes to Saturday and Sunday at the Masters. Yeah. So I've just had azaleas on the brain. I think that's what it is. And we got to go last week, and my wife and I, that was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. I'm glad you did, and it looked like it was a lot of fun keeping up with you over there. Let's talk about spring football. You're an ex-football player, ex-quarterback. How important is it to a quarterback?
Yeah, well, it's important for your development, and certainly when you're young, it's really important for your development. When you look at situations, too, like, say, over here for Mississippi State, when you have new position coaches, new offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, all that kind of stuff, spring it can be really important in kind of the welding of the operation so that it's primed and ready to go when you start fall camp. And even now, in 2018, Scott, it's as much about getting guys acclimated so that they can work on their own throughout the summer on the things they need to work on. So it's a big-time developmental tool. There's also an element of you're drilling players on fundamentals, that kind of thing. But it's 2 different processes for established coaching staffs versus new ones. You know, like if you look at Saban in Alabama, you go, well, what is spring about? Well, number one, it's about player development, and to a degree, probably player evaluation. There ain't a whole lot of establishing the groundwork of how you're going to go about practice and what the atmosphere is going to be like. They've already done that. But when you look at Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State, it's their first go-around. It's a chance to get to know each other in pads as well as start to learn the terminology.
But Alabama does have 6 new assistants, so there is somewhat of a curve, but you're right as far as how things are done, at least generally or broadly speaking, that's kind of set, though. Did you ever experience a positional coach change while a head coach stayed the same?
Oh, yeah. When I played what feels like 100 years ago, it was only 20, but it feels like it was 100. We had the same head coach my whole time. It was Jackie Sherrill, but we had, in 5 years, I had 3 different offensive coordinator quarterbacks coaches. My first year it was Bruce Arians, and then a guy named Lynn Amity for 3 years. And then my last year, my senior year, we played under Sparky Woods. He was the OC quarterbacks coach my last year. So 3 different times we had to make that adjustment at one time or another. And going from junior to senior, when they had a changeover at our position coach and coordinator, I actually was considering playing baseball. I missed it, and they had a great College World Series type program at State, and I thought, well, it'd be cool to be on a baseball team, and was thinking about doing that. But because of a switch over at quarterbacks coach coordinator, it just didn't allow for that because I would have been so far behind if I missed those initial installations and practices and getting to know the new coach. So when you get a new position coach, spring goes a long way towards getting to know that guy and understanding what he wants from you at practice.
What do we know about, from afar, Dan Enos and what you've seen at Arkansas? Then he's at Alabama. What I see in the limited time I can see him at practice 2 or 3 times a week, tons of footwork drills. I mean, yesterday they were jumping over dummies, and these guys have got to get used to that. Besides just all the other footwork drills, he's just a footwork freak, it seems like.
Yeah, and that's going to be pretty normal, I think, across Division I ball, and that is those guys who are quarterbacks gurus, they understand one thing, and that is you throw with your feet and not your arm. By the time you get to that level, Scott, everybody there can throw the ball, right? I mean, every kid who is a quarterback at an SEC school can throw it. And there's not a lot of mechanical work you're going to do with a kid at that stage in his life in terms of throwing the ball. And I mean, there's some stuff, yeah. But the way you improve accuracy, the way you improve completion percentage is you have better feet. You have better footwork. They're always in place. They don't get out of whack. Your stride is not too wide. It's not too narrow. Your knee drives towards your target. It's going to improve accuracy. You're not going to bounce the ball out there as much. So those guys like him, and they know quarterbacks throw with their feet, and your accuracy comes from what is your footwork like. And I'll tell you, watching he and his offenses at Arkansas, I was always really impressed. And I know kind of the wheels came off a little bit there late. I know that Austin Allen, by some accounts, maybe underperformed in his last year, but I was always really impressed with their offense. When they had it going, getting those tight ends open at Arkansas, crossing routes when Brandon Allen was the QB, they were really hard to stop, and you almost had the feeling that Dan Enos might be the next assistant from an SEC school to jump up and be a head coach. Of course, now his career path has changed a little bit. I still believe that. I think he's just a guy who a year or two or three under Saban, and the next thing you know, he'll be a head coach somewhere.
Yeah, he's very impressive. And it's going to be interesting to see the dynamic between him, Mike Locks, and everything. But it seems like Saban's kind of a master at mixing these things when you think, wow, how's that going to go when Enos is really coordinator capable and Loxley got moved up but got passed over 2 years ago, just mixing all that together. But he seems like he gets away with it well. Got the same thing on the defensive side with Lapoy and then bringing in Golding. Lapoy's never been a coordinator. Golding has, Yeah,
that's right. And that's the other thing, too, is sometimes if you find the right attitude, personality, and somebody that's not a me guy, and let's face it, those kind of guys don't hang around Saban very long, right? You got to be a team first kind of individual, and if that's your attitude, then he'll put you in a position where it's actually going to help you in the long run. So, like you say, someone who has been a coordinator locking arms with somebody who hasn't, and they kind of bring each other along, help each other out. So, it can work, and there's a reason that Alabama wins. It's because they do that stuff right. They make the right hires. He has a system where when people come in, they understand the expectation, and that is team first, and if you're not, we'll ship you out of here pretty quick.
Matt Wyatt, who also does a lot of work with the Mississippi State football team and the radio host, like I said, Super Talk Mississippi podcast videos. We'll tell you all about that as we go. You can follow him on Twitter at Radio Wyatt, by the way. So as far as spring, again, quarterbacks, okay, development, different things. But really the spring game, it's a throwaway, isn't it? Or is it not a throwaway? Because I'm looking at it now that everybody waters everything down so much that there's not a lot to it, except unless you're so young and the starters are protected and they throw those guys in there, maybe they get something out of it. Am I wrong? Or
No, you're looking at it right. I mean, 90% of your players would be just fine if you didn't have anything even resembling a spring game. So I think the number one purpose of a spring game is it's a marketing tool. And that means just simply outreach to fans and potential recruits. That's what it is for. That's the number one purpose that a spring game is for. It is a marketing arm of the team and a reach out to say, hey, fans, come in here and see us and enjoy it. And if you do, maybe you'll come back and buy another ticket, continue to support us. And, oh, by the way, recruits, check us out.
Yeah.
We'll be on the SEC Network at 6 type of thing. And then that ancillary purpose, I think, the game itself, it might be in certain situations you're going to have a player here, a young guy there that you can put them on the field in a little bit more of a game-like situation and get some film of them. Let's just say it's an up-and-coming redshirt freshman who hasn't played in a game yet, but he's going to be a big part of your depth chart in the fall. Well, you can get him on tape some, and maybe it helps you to evaluate him and then develop him in the off season. And those situations do happen. And then I think also, if I were a coach, I would always use the spring game with fans in the stands as an opportunity to put my kickers out there. You know, those kickers are a little bit like golfers in that they've got to perform when all eyes are on them and they're set up and they got to go hit that tee shot. And so the kicking game, or especially field goal kicking, is one that you can use the spring game to kind of evaluate that, put them in a game-like situation. But the rest of it, it's basically marketing and outreach, and that's about it.
Yeah, and I agree with you because I think I see the proliferation of all these, and especially in the Big Ten, in the last few days, 3 or 4 teams just canceling spring games. A lot of people are going, why? But I think they get the practice time back, so they'd probably rather have the practice again later in the week when nobody's watching, as opposed to a game, like you said, except for that marketing part of it.
There's no doubt about it. Coaches, 99% of them would just as much would prefer have another practice, and they feel like they could get just as much accomplished.
So what do we got? What has State got with Joe Moorhead? He came in, he's done about everything you can do right, I think, coming into that job right now. And that's just me looking from afar. Is that accurate or?
Yeah. And it is. And, I heard you mention earlier, things like covering Destin and SEC Media Days, and I think you're going to enjoy covering him and interviewing him, and because he's a little different than your typical SEC head coach in that he's just kind of a blue collar, everyday guy. He's like one of us, There's really no, you don't get a sense of a guy who's walking around with a glow. He's just a blue collar guy like the rest of us, and he approaches life that way. But he also approaches the job that way. He's very pragmatic. When he's on the job, it's no nonsense. When it's not, he's got a great sense of humor. He's a family first kind of guy. The times that I've spent talking to him one-on-one, he talks a lot about his kids, what they're doing, playing youth basketball, and what his daughter's doing. So. He's a guy that people have really warmed up to from a personality standpoint right away. And that, frankly, is the opposite of a guy like Dan Mullen. So for that reason, folks around here are really pulling for Coach Moorhead. They're really going to want to see him succeed for a lot of reasons. But, he's got the offensive pedigree. From an intelligence standpoint, he's off the charts. And he does have the head coaching experience, but it's not at this level yet. And so that'll be the learning curve for him. He's put some former head coaches on his staff, and he's got a good mix of NFL guys versus, college guys. And right now practice is going well, and Mullen handed him a really good, thick, experienced roster to work with. And so they've got pretty high expectations.
Now, give me the lay of the land. With Ole Miss, they hire Matt Luke. I thought they did about as good as they could do, considering last year. Yep. They're still in the muck, obviously, of this thing somewhat. Yep. What are they in? How can Moorhead, being a new coach, capitalize? Because this is a huge year, as you know, in the state of Mississippi, recruiting-wise. There's a chance to get some talent that can help you for 3 or 4 years coming up here. So this is kind of key. Am I reading that wrong?
Yeah, it really is key for them, Scott. And they're in a precarious spot in that you're right. I mean, they hired Matt Luke, and I think he is a good football coach. But under any other circumstance, does he get that job? Well, the answer is no. And so what growing pains as a coach is he going to have to work through taking over the job full time? That's one of their question marks. The other thing is, in the Hugh Freeze years, their roster was built in a very, very unbalanced way. Here's the best example. On offense, in Greg Little at offensive tackle and A.J. Brown at receiver, they have 2 guys who are not only first-round draft picks next year, but maybe even top 10 picks next year on that side of the ball. But on defense, they are sorely lacking for players, Division I type linebackers. They don't have any depth on defense. So they really mismanaged their roster, frankly. In the middle, on top of all what they have now in recruiting restrictions and visit restrictions and probation and all that kind of stuff. So they're very much up against it, and the fact is that even though it was bad weather for their spring game, they didn't have anybody there. And when I say that, I mean almost literally they didn't have anybody there. It was for their spring game. It was just even though it was a cold day, I thought it was very indicative of kind of the malaise that's just hanging over that program.
Yeah, and so Mississippi State with Moorhead, you get some of these guys. You know, Alabama's going to probably come get a few, but you get a lot of these guys in the state. You're doing pretty good.
Well, and 2019, the recruiting guys tell you is a thick year for 4- and 5-star type players in Mississippi. And, you know, and per capita, this state over here really turns out the football players. You know?
Yeah. Anyway, yearly they do, right? But this is even more so now. Or coming up.
That's right. Yeah, you're right. And in 2019, there's a bunch of guys. And that's one of the things that I think the state fan base right now is so happy with Moorhead and his staff. You know, Charles Huff came with him from Penn State. He's the running backs coach.
Yeah.
He was number 1, number 2 recruiter in the country in his time at Penn State. Well, they've come in here and, you know, they work relentlessly at recruiting. It is I mean, you talk to people in the building and they say they've never quite seen anything like it. The kind of the drive that those guys work with in recruiting, and it's starting to pay off. They just committed a guy who's a big 4-star defensive player from Nashville yesterday, had some nice offers. So far it's going well, and they are bound and determined to take advantage of the situation over the next couple of years.